Hi, it's Dr. Michael McGinnell here. Welcome back to part two. This is just my reflection on the really like a philosophical reflection on what's the implications of the assassination of Charlie Kirk on September the 10th, 2025. And I think what was so galling for many of us, I suppose, is how people were celebrating the death of another human being who leaves behind a widow and two children, and particularly when the guiding principle of Charlie's life was a commitment to discourse, because he said where the discourse ends, then violence begins. And that's irrespective of his religious commitment. You can agree or disagree with that, but he was every bit an American, somebody who believed in the First Amendment of the Constitution, which is the right to free speech, and the right to free speech was backed for by the Second Amendment, which was the right to bear arms, which was the right of the populace and the people to defend themselves against the government, because being somebody sort of like British, the context of the reason why that amendment was so important to the American founders was because a lot of the countries where people had come from, from Britain, the countries of Europe, the rulers attacked the people and oppressed the people, and they weren't allowed to speak freely, and that's why that's so central to, if you like, the American psyche. And what's been happening in Europe, especially since COVID, very much through COVID, and especially since COVID, is that people's free speech rights, that wonderful sort of like common law that was in the tradition of most of the countries of Europe, all the way from sort of like from the British Magna Carta, and that right to speak freely has been systematically removed, and there's been this concept called hate speech, which is being used as a crowbar to destroy people's free speech rights. And I think this, from a philosophical point of view, and the point of view of political philosophy, and is probably the issue that I think we need to focus on, because there's such an enormous implications of the philosophical difference between, say, considering speech as hate speech, and considering speech as a form of violence. There's some critical things there to think about, because if you can justify say that hate speech, if you like, I'm going to use that term because it's just at least for discussion purposes. Whether or not it's a legitimate term is another matter, which we'll get to. But if you can have a concept of hate speech and a concept that speech is violence, then you can say that I am able to meet that violence that's committed against me with the commensurate amount of violence that allows me to overcome that violence that I've suffered. And that is the basic Marxist equation, if you like. It's now couched in terms like critical theory, which is just Marxist mode of analysis, which is the oppressed matrix applied to other areas other than the economic. The pure Marxist considered the relations of society a matter of economic relations, of economic oppression. So you had the workers, and you had the rulers and the industrialists and the aristocrats who would exploit the workers and not and keep them in a place of oppression. And so the critical theorist, whether that's a matter of identity politics, say for example, for the one that's really central to sort of like Charlie Kirk's case in particular, is the trans ideology, if you like, transsexual ideology, which is distinct. I think for most people, it is now becoming obvious and evident that it's actually distinct from, say, from the LGB part. Even though people try to lump them together, and the T movement has wanted to attach itself onto the LGB movement. Really, for a lot of LGB people, it's just a matter of sexual preference. It's not a matter of ideology. Now, there is the if you like, the Marxist and the radical Marxist wing within the LGB movement, which is very much more aligned with what you would think that the trans movement is. But for a lot of it's very evident within the school shootings that have happened in the US. I think the last 7 of them, if you think about this, the last 7 of them have been committed by people committed to a trans ideology. And if they've had manifestos, you can actually go and read their manifestos. And some of them were covered over by the authorities at the time because it didn't fit with the, if you like, what the DEI movement within the US and within the West generally, and trying to consider this is just a matter of sexual orientation or something, but it's not. It's something much deeper. It's a much more fundamental rebellion against any vestige of what you might call the Judeo-Christian order. A lot of postmodernists realise this. Derrida, a famous postmodernist, French postmodernist writer, Sartre, the existentialist, realised this. He said, I found I'd kicked out the Father and the Son, but I found the Holy Spirit lurking in my basement. But what he was actually saying was that he understood that the very concept of being able to use language to express meaning and for people to have a dialogue and solve their problems by dialogue was something that was embedded in the Judeo-Christian concept of the world, the Judeo-Christian worldview, that sort of like idea that we settle our differences by discussion, by discourse, by debate. It doesn't even mean that we have to end up agreeing at the end of the debate or settling something at the end of the debate. We hopefully at some point we will, and we'll come to some sort of consensus, and as a democracy we decide where we want to go. So that the if you like, that sort of like radical sort of form of postmodernism that gets mixed up with violence and violent ideologies, and then gets mixed up with Islamic fundamentalism, and we're just going to tear down the West because it's fundamentally corrupt and it has these power relationships. And for the transsexual movement or for the T movement, if you like, the intersectional analysis is such that it asserts that because you refuse to accept my identity, you're committing violence against me, and therefore I am allowed to respond in a commensurate manner to violently to commit violence against you, so that my identity and my right to are preserved. And so if you accept that equation, then it's a legitimate mode. And so the obvious point, I think some of the recent episodes of sort of like Ben Shapiro show, he was really good on this, because he just sort of like said, right, this start with whatever, if you can equate something with violence and that you're oppressed, you're then justified in using violence. And where this becomes the most problematic is that if you're dealing with, say, for example, with what you call hate speech, and you define this concept called hate speech, and then you say, you're being violent against me with your words, therefore I can be violent, I cannot respond to your violence or your microaggressions. These are all words we've heard, haven't we, in the last 10 years. I can respond in a commensurate manner. And it's that equation that we really need to deal with. So let's I may well break this at this point, just to but we want to move on in a sense to consider in more detail that equation, that violence equation. Okay, thank you.